My hand trembled as I scribbled the words across the bottom of the check, the pen pressing so hard into the paper that it nearly tore through. Order number 3 isn't food. It's a code to kill someone here. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. The warning was enough. What I didn't know, as I slid that check onto the polished marble table, was that the man I was trying to save was the most dangerous person in the room, and that saving him would destroy everything I thought I knew about survival. The clinking of wine glasses and the low murmur of expensive conversations filled Velluto Nero, the kind of upscale Italian restaurant where a single entrée cost more than my weekly rent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm amber light across tables draped in white linen, where the city's elite pretended their money was clean and their hands weren't stained. I'd worked here for 8 months, long enough to recognize the difference between old money and new blood, between corporate executives celebrating mergers and men whose business dealings never made it into boardrooms, long enough to know when something was wrong. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Tonight, everything was wrong. It started when Vincent Calabrese walked in at exactly 9:15, flanked by 2 men whose suits couldn't quite hide the bulk of shoulder holsters. Vincent was a regular, the kind who tipped well, but expected you to forget his face the moment he left. He never sat in the main dining room, always the private alcove in the back, always the same table, always with men who looked like they'd grown up breaking kneecaps for lunch money. But tonight was different. Tonight, Vincent had walked past his usual spot and requested table 7, right in the center of the dining room, right next to the man sitting alone at table 5, reading the evening news on his tablet, completely unaware that he'd just become the most interesting person in the restaurant. I'd noticed him the moment he arrived. You couldn't not notice him. He had the kind of presence that made the air shift when he moved, like gravity bent differently around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that looked carved from marble and cruelty in equal measure. His suit was charcoal gray and probably cost more than my car, which wasn't saying much considering my car barely started on cold mornings. He wore no tie, just a crisp white shirt with the top button undone, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and what looked like the edge of a tattoo. Dante Salvatore. I'd heard the name whispered in the kitchen when Carlos, our head chef, had seen the reservation. I'd seen the way Marco, our floor manager, had personally greeted him at the door, his usual composure cracking just enough to show fear disguised as respect. I'd watched as our best table was suddenly cleared and reset within minutes, even though the couple who'd reserved it had confirmed just that morning. Men like Dante Salvatore didn't need reservations. They needed warnings. I should have requested that someone else serve his section, should have claimed I was swamped with my other tables, that my feet were killing me, that I needed a break. But rent was due in 3 days, and I was $200 short. The tips from a man like Salvatore could cover that, and maybe, just maybe, leave enough for the dentist appointment I'd been putting off for 6 months. So I'd smoothed down my black serving apron, tucked a stray piece of hair behind my ear, and approached his table with my best smile plastered across my face. The smile I'd perfected over years of serving people who looked through me like I was made of glass. "Good evening, sir. My name is Sophia, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" He'd looked up from his tablet, and the full force of his attention had hit me like a physical thing. His eyes were dark, almost black in the restaurant's dim lighting, and they studied me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. Not the way some men looked at waitresses, with that lazy, entitled hunger that made you want to dump their drinks in their laps. This was different, assessing, calculating, like he was reading a book written in a language only he understood, and I was a particularly interesting chapter. "Whiskey," he'd said, his voice deep and smooth, with the barest trace of an accent I couldn't quite place. "Macallan 25, neat, and bring me your menu, though I already know what I want." "Of course. I'll be right back with that." I'd retreated to the bar, my pulse racing for reasons I refused to examine too closely. Daniel, our bartender, had raised an eyebrow when I'd ordered the Macallan, a bottle they kept locked away for special occasions and special people. "Table 5 is ordering the good stuff, he'd remarked, reaching for the top shelf. "Marco said to comp whatever he orders. Full VIP treatment." "Who is he?" Daniel had shot me a look that clearly said I should already know, but he'd answered anyway, his voice dropping low. "Dante Salvatore. Runs half the shipping operations on the East Coast, allegedly." The allegedly was a formality, the word people used when everyone knew the truth, but nobody could prove it in court. "Word is he's expanding into new territory, making moves that are pissing off some old families who think they still run this city." My stomach had tightened with unease, but I'd taken the whiskey and returned to Dante's table, setting it down with practiced precision. He'd barely glanced at it before ordering, his choices precise and unhesitating. Oysters to start, the ribeye medium rare, roasted vegetables on the side. "Order number 5 on our menu." That's when Vincent Calabrese had arrived and requested table 7. That's when I'd noticed the pattern. In 8 months of working at Velluto Nero, I'd learned to read the unspoken language of our darker clientele. The way certain men never sat with their backs to doors. The way conversations stopped when waitstaff approached. The way they ordered specific dishes on specific nights. Items that had nothing to do with taste and everything to do with messages. Vincent had ordered immediately after sitting down, not even bothering to look at the menu. "I'll have order number 3, he'd told me, his smile not reaching his eyes. "And make sure it's prepared exactly as specified, no substitutions." Order number 3 was chicken marsala. We served it at least a dozen times a night. But something about the way Vincent had said it, the emphasis on exactly as specified, had sent ice sliding down my spine. I'd returned to the kitchen and called in both orders, watching as Carlos had prepared Dante's oysters with his usual meticulous care. But when I'd called out order 3 for table 7, I'd seen something I'd never seen before. Carlos had gone completely still, his knife hovering above the cutting board. Then he'd exchanged a look with his sous chef, Marco, a look that carried the weight of knowledge I wasn't supposed to have. "Order 3 for table 7, Carlos had repeated slowly. "You're certain that's what he said? Not table 5? "Table 7, Vincent Calabrese." Another loaded glance between the kitchen staff. Then Carlos had nodded once, sharp and final. "Got it. It'll be ready in 20 minutes. 20 minutes, for a dish that usually took 12. I'd delivered Dante's oysters, along with fresh bread and olive oil, ultra aware of Vincent watching from the adjacent table. Dante had thanked me with a slight nod, his attention already back on his tablet, scrolling through what looked like shipping manifests or financial reports. He seemed completely unconcerned with the world around him, totally unaware that 3 tables away, Vincent's companions kept glancing in his direction with the kind of attention that had nothing to do with admiration. It had clicked then, pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Order number 3 wasn't about food. It was about position. Table 5 was the 3rd table from the kitchen entrance, the 3rd in the main dining room's sightline. Order 3 meant table 5 meant the target, and Dante Salvatore was sitting at table 5. My hands had started shaking as I'd refilled water glasses, my mind racing through possibilities. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd spent too many late nights reading crime novels, letting my imagination run wild. Maybe order 3 really was just chicken marsala, and Vincent's emphasis had been about his preference for extra mushrooms. But I'd seen Carlos's face. I'd seen that look. And I'd seen the way one of Vincent's men had excused himself to the bathroom, walking past Dante's table just a little too slowly, his eyes assessing angles and exits and opportunities. I couldn't go to Marco. Marco took his orders from whoever paid the most, and his terror of Dante Salvatore suggested those payments came from other sources. I couldn't call the police without proof, without sounding like a paranoid waitress who'd watched too many Mafia movies. And I couldn't just walk up to Dante Salvatore and say, "Excuse me, sir, I think someone's planning to kill you," because either I was wrong and would lose my job, or I was right and would lose my life. So I'd done the only thing I could think of. I'd taken his check, the one I'd prepared early since he'd ordered everything at once, and I'd written my warning across the bottom in handwriting I barely recognized as my own. Now that check sat on his table, face down, waiting for him to turn it over and read words that would either save his life or end mine. I retreated to the service station, pretending to fold napkins while watching Dante's table through my peripheral vision. He'd finished his oysters, the empty shells arranged neatly on the plate like broken promises. His whiskey glass was nearly empty. Any moment now, he'd signal for his check, and then he reached for it. My heart stopped as I watched him flip over the small leather portfolio containing the check. Watched his eyes scan the total, then drop to the bottom where my desperate scrawl waited. His expression didn't change. Not a flicker of surprise, not a hint of concern. He simply read the words, then calmly set the check down and lifted his hand to signal me over. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to grab my purse from the back and disappear into the night, to leave the city entirely and never look back. But my feet carried me forward anyway, drawn by something stronger than self-preservation. Maybe it was the memory of my brother dead at 19 in a drive-by shooting that was ruled gang-related and never solved. Maybe it was the stubborn part of me that was so tired of watching bad things happen to good people while everyone else looked away. Or maybe it was the way Dante Salvatore looked at me as I approached his table, his dark eyes holding something that looked almost like curiosity, mixed with a respect I'd never seen directed at me before. "Is there a problem with your check, sir?" I asked, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. "I'd like to discuss it with you, privately." He stood in one fluid motion, leaving cash on the table, far more than the bill required. The back exit, near the kitchen, 2 minutes. Before I could respond, he walked away, moving through the restaurant with the kind of confidence that came from knowing everyone would step aside. And they did. Conversations paused as he passed. Eyes followed him with mixtures of fear and fascination. Even the air seemed to part for him. I stood frozen at his abandoned table, the empty whiskey glass catching the light like amber ice. 2 minutes. He wanted to meet me by the back exit, the one the staff used for smoke breaks and trash disposal, the one that opened onto a dark alley where anything could happen and probably had. Every rational thought told me not to go, told me to grab Marco, to call the police, to do anything except follow a man like Dante Salvatore into a dark alley based on a warning I'd scribbled on a check. But I'd already made my choice when I wrote those words. I'd already stepped over a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I glanced toward the table 7, where Vincent and his men were still waiting for their order, for order number 3. They hadn't noticed Dante's departure yet, too busy with their own hushed conversation, their attention focused on some plan they thought would unfold exactly as designed. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I moved toward the kitchen, my pulse hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Past the swinging doors, where Carlos was plating something that looked like chicken marsala, but felt like something far more sinister. Past the prep stations and the dish pit, where steam rose like ghosts in the harsh fluorescent light. Past the shelf where I kept my purse, and I grabbed it without breaking stride. Some instinct telling me I wouldn't be coming back tonight. Maybe not ever. The back exit was propped open, the way it always was despite Marco's constant complaints about the health code. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain and garbage and the city's endless exhaust. I could see Dante's silhouette in the alley, illuminated by the yellow glow of a security light that flickered like it was considering giving up entirely. I stepped out into the darkness, the door swinging shut behind me, with a finality that echoed off the brick walls. We were alone, surrounded by dumpsters and recycling bins and the kinds of shadows where bad things happened. Dante turned to face me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied me with those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through all my defenses. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Sophia." My voice came out barely above a whisper. "Sophia Martinez." "Sophia." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. "Do you know who I am?" "Yes." "And yet, you warned me anyway." It wasn't a question. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of watching people die and pretending I didn't see it coming. Because my brother's blood still stains a sidewalk 3 blocks from here, and nobody cared enough to find out why. Because I'm so tired of being invisible, of being the person nobody notices until they need their water refilled." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "Because it was the right thing to do." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition of something he hadn't expected to find in a place like this, in a person like me. "Tell me what you know," he commanded softly, and somehow the gentleness of his tone was more compelling than any threat could have been. So I told him about Vincent's arrival, about order number 3, about the look between Carlos and his sous chef, about the way Vincent's men kept glancing towards table 5. I told him everything I'd noticed, every small detail that had added up to a conclusion I prayed I was wrong about, but knew in my bones was right. He listened, without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation, not with fear, but with a cold fury that was somehow more terrifying than panic would have been. "Vincent Calabrese," he said, when I'd finished, and his voice carried the weight of a judgment already passed. "Working with the Morettis, most likely. They've been trying to push me out of the shipping operations for months. This would be their play, quiet and public enough to send a message, but disguised as something else entirely." "What will you do?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt stripped bare under his gaze. "That depends on you, Sophia Martinez." "On me?" "You just saved my life. That creates a debt." He stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne now, something dark and expensive that made my head spin. "More than that, you just made yourself a target. The moment Vincent realizes his plan failed, he'll start looking for the reason why. And when he figures out you warned me..." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication hung in the air between us like smoke. Fear, cold and sharp, flooded through me. I hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what would happen after I warned him, only that I had to try. "So what do I do?" My voice shook now, all my earlier courage evaporating in the face of consequences I hadn't fully understood. Dante reached out, his hand coming up to cup my chin, tilting my face up to his with surprising gentleness. His touch burned against my skin, a mixture of danger and something else I refused to name. "You come with me," he said simply. "Right now, you disappear from this place, from this life, and you let me protect you from the storm that's about to break." "I can't just disappear," I protested weakly, even as part of me recognized the truth in his words. "I have a lease, a life, responsibilities." "You have a death sentence the moment you walk back into that restaurant." His thumb brushed against my lower lip, the gesture achingly intimate despite the darkness of his words. "Vincent will piece it together, Sophia. Men like him always do. And when he does, all your responsibilities won't matter because you'll be dead." The bluntness of his assessment should have terrified me. Instead, it crystallized something that had been building since the moment I'd written those words on his check. I'd already made my choice. I'd chosen to step into this world, to interfere with forces I barely understood, to value a stranger's life over my own safety. Now, I had to live with the consequences. "And if I go with you?" I asked quietly. "What then? I become what? Your property? Another debt to be collected?" His eyes flashed with something dark and possessive. "You become mine to protect. There's a difference." "Is there?" A smile curved his lips, dangerous and promising in equal measure. "I suppose we'll find out." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. "My men just reported unusual movement around the restaurant. Vincent's people are getting restless." His eyes found mine again. "We need to leave, now." As if summoning them from shadows, 2 black SUVs pulled up at the end of the alley, their engines purring like predators. Dante's hand moved to the small of my back, guiding me toward the vehicles with the same possessive certainty he'd shown all evening. "Wait," I said, pulling back. "I can't just leave. I need to—" "There's no time." His grip tightened, not painful, but unyielding. "Whatever you need, I'll provide. Whoever you need to contact, my people will handle it. But right now, Sophia, you need to trust me, because in about 3 minutes, Vincent is going to realize I'm gone, and this alley is going to become a war zone." I looked back at the restaurant, at the life I'd built from minimum wage and hope and sheer stubbornness. My small apartment with its leaking faucet and the neighbor's cat that visited my fire escape. My shifts at Velluto Nero that barely covered rent, but gave me structure, purpose, something to wake up for. My carefully maintained invisibility that had kept me safe for so long. All of it was gone now, burned away the moment I'd decided that one man's life was worth more than my own comfortable obscurity. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll go with you." The satisfaction in Dante's eyes was unmistakable as he guided me into the back seat of the lead SUV. The leather was soft, the interior smelling of money and power and danger. He slid in beside me, close enough that our thighs touched, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. The door had barely closed before the vehicle pulled away, leaving the restaurant and the alley and my old life disappearing behind tinted windows. Through the glass, I caught one last glimpse of Velluto Nero's glowing entrance, and I wondered if I'd ever see it again. Wondered if anyone would notice when I didn't show up for my next shift. Wondered if my landlord would simply throw out my things when the rent went unpaid, erasing the small evidence of my existence like I'd never been there at all. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice small in the silence. "Somewhere safe," Dante replied, his hand finding mine in the darkness between us, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "Somewhere they can't reach you." "And then what?" He turned to look at me, and in the passing streetlights, his face was all sharp angles and shadows, beautiful and dangerous, like a blade. "Then we figure out what comes next, together." The weight of that single word settled over me like a promise and a threat. Together. as if my warning had bound us together in ways I couldn't yet understand, as if saving his life had somehow given him claim to mine. The city blurred past the windows, familiar streets giving way to unfamiliar ones, the buildings growing taller and more expensive as we moved into neighborhoods where people like me didn't exist except to serve. My old life was already miles behind us, and with every block we traveled, the distance grew wider. I'd written a warning on a check to save a stranger's life. I hadn't realized I'd be signing away my own in the process, hadn't understood that mercy could be its own kind of trap, that salvation could look exactly like captivity if you weren't careful. But as Dante's thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, as the city lights painted patterns across his dangerous face, as my heart raced with fear and something else I refused to name, I wondered if maybe I'd been trapped long before tonight. Trapped in a life of invisibility, of serving others while my own dreams collected dust. Trapped in the safety of obscurity while the world burned around me and I pretended not to notice. Maybe this wasn't captivity at all. Maybe it was the most dangerous kind of freedom. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of the obsidian tower, a gleaming spire of black glass that pierced the skyline like a blade. I'd seen it countless times from street level, always from the perspective of someone who would never get closer than the sidewalk outside. Now I stood in its private elevator, watching the numbers climb higher and higher, my reflection staring back at me from polished mirrors that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned combined. Dante stood beside me, his hand still holding mine. That connection between us, feeling both protective and like a chain I'd willingly locked around my own wrist. His phone had been buzzing constantly since we'd left the restaurant, but he'd ignored every call, his attention fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin burn. "You're afraid," he observed. Not a question, but a statement of fact. "Shouldn't I be?" I managed, my voice echoing slightly in the confined space. His thumb traced the rapid pulse at my wrist. "Fear is natural, but you're not afraid of me, are you, Sophia? You're afraid of what comes next." He was right, though I hated that he could read me so easily. The fear coiling in my stomach had nothing to do with Dante himself, and everything to do with the irrevocable choice I'd made. There was no going back to my apartment, no returning to the safety of obscurity, no pretending I hadn't seen what I'd seen or done what I'd done. The elevator doors opened directly into the penthouse, and my breath caught at the sheer scope of it. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the entire space, offering a 360-degree view of the city sprawled below like a constellation of earthbound stars. Everything was sleek and modern, all dark wood and leather and chrome, expensive art on walls that probably required security clearances to touch. It was beautiful in the way dangerous things often are, elegant and cold and utterly unforgiving. "This is your home?" I asked, stepping into the vast living area, my worn sneakers silent on floors that gleamed like obsidian. "One of them." Dante moved past me to a bar built into the far wall, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. "I find it useful to have options. People who can be found are people who can be killed." The casual way he discussed his own mortality sent a chill through me. This was his reality, had been long before tonight, a world where survival meant staying 3 steps ahead of death, where trust was currency more valuable than money, where one wrong move could end everything. He returned with the drinks, pressing one into my hand. Our fingers brushed, and electricity sparked between us. That same awareness I'd felt in the restaurant, now amplified by proximity and adrenaline. "I don't drink whiskey," I said, staring at the glass. "Tonight, you do." His voice was gentle but unyielding. "You're in shock, Sophia. Your hands are shaking, and your pupils are dilated. You need something to take the edge off before the reality of what just happened really hits you. I looked down and realized he was right. My hands were trembling, the whiskey creating small amber waves against the crystal. I took a sip, the liquid burning down my throat, spreading warmth through my chest that had nothing to do with the alcohol and everything to do with the man watching me with those dark, knowing eyes. "What happens now?" I asked, lowering the glass. "To Vincent? To the restaurant? To—" "Vincent is being dealt with as we speak." Dante's expression hardened, something cold and merciless flickering across his features. He made a mistake tonight, a fatal one. He underestimated the value of having someone notice what others overlook. "You mean me?" "I mean you." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingertips lingering against my cheek. "You saw what trained soldiers missed. You risked everything to warn a stranger. That kind of courage is rare, Sophia. That kind of integrity even rarer." His touch made it hard to think, hard to remember all the reasons I should be terrified of this man and this situation. "I'm not courageous. I'm a waitress who wrote a note on a check. That's not exactly heroic." "Isn't it?" His hand moved to cup my jaw, tilting my face up to his. "You knew what world I belonged to, knew the kind of danger that comes with interfering, and you did it anyway. That's not courage?" Put like that, it sounded almost noble, but I'd seen enough of life to know that nobility and stupidity often looked identical until after the fact, and only the survivors got to claim the distinction. His phone buzzed again, more insistent this time. With obvious reluctance, he released me and answered, his voice dropping into Italian so rapid and fluid I could only catch fragments. But I didn't need to understand the words to recognize the tone. This was Dante Salvatore giving orders, each syllable crisp with authority, each pause loaded with threat. I moved to the windows while he spoke, pressing my palm against the cool glass. The city spread below me, looked different from up here. The streets I'd walked just hours ago now reduced to glowing lines in the darkness. Somewhere down there, Vincent Calabrese was discovering his plan had failed. Somewhere down there, my apartment sat empty, my things waiting for an owner who might never return. Somewhere down there was the life I'd built from nothing, now as unreachable as the stars. "That was my head of security," Dante said, ending the call and crossing to stand behind me. I could feel the heat of his body, the solid presence of him just inches away. "Vincent won't be a problem anymore. Neither will his associates." I didn't ask what that meant. Didn't want to know the details of what dealt with entailed in Dante Salvatore's world. Some questions were better left unasked, some knowledge better left unknown. "And the restaurant?" My voice sounded small against the glass. "Will find itself under new management by morning. Marco has been persuaded to retire, and Carlos is being offered an opportunity to open his own establishment, fully funded, in exchange for his cooperation and silence." He paused, and I felt, rather than saw, his hand hover near my shoulder. "You won't be able to go back there, Sophia. You understand that?" I understand. And I did, with a clarity that hurt. My life, such as it was, had ended the moment I'd picked up that pen. There was only forward now, into whatever darkness or light waited ahead. His hand finally made contact, settling warm and possessive on my shoulder. "You're taking this better than I expected." I almost laughed, the sound bitter. "What choice do I have? Fall apart? Cry? Beg you to let me go back to a life that doesn't exist anymore?" I turned to face him, and the closeness stole my breath. His chest was inches from mine, his dark eyes holding something that looked almost like admiration. "I made my choice when I wrote that warning, Mr. Salvatore. Now I have to live with it." Dante, he corrected, his voice dropping lower. When we're alone, you call me Dante. The intimacy of his name on my tongue felt dangerous, like crossing another line I couldn't uncross. But I was already so far past lines that one more hardly mattered. Dante, I repeated, and something blazed in his eyes at the sound. His hands came up to frame my face, and for a heartbeat I thought he might kiss me. Wanted him to kiss me, despite everything, despite the fear and uncertainty and the weight of all the unknowns pressing down on us. But he didn't. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, his breath mingling with mine in the space between. You could have run, he murmured. In that alley, you could have refused to come with me, could have taken your chances with the police, with disappearing on your own. Could I have? I challenged softly. Or would your men have made sure I came with you, regardless of what I wanted? His jaw tightened, and I felt the tension roll through him. Yes, he admitted after a long moment. I would have made you come anyway. You were dead the moment you interfered, Sophia. Whether you acknowledged it or not, whether you wanted to or not, the only way you survive is under my protection. So I'm a prisoner. You're alive. His hands tightened fractionally against my face. There's a difference. Is there? He pulled back enough to look at me properly, and what I saw in his eyes made my heart stutter. Not just possession or desire, though both were there, burning beneath the surface, but something else, something raw and almost vulnerable that seemed at odds with everything I knew about men like him. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I intend to find out. Before I could process that, before I could ask what he meant, his phone erupted with calls. Not just buzzing now, but a full alarm, the sound shrill and urgent in the quiet penthouse. Dante's expression shifted instantly, all softness evaporating into cold calculation as he stepped away and answered. This time, his voice was harder, sharper, the Italian flowing faster. I caught words I recognized: traditore, sangue, guerra, traitor, blood, war. His free hand clenched into a fist at his side, and I watched as the civilized veneer he wore so well cracked to reveal the violence beneath. When he ended the call, his eyes found mine across the space between us, and I saw something there that made my blood run cold. Not anger at me, but fury directed at forces I couldn't see, threats I couldn't comprehend. What's wrong? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Vincent wasn't working alone, Dante said, each word clipped and precise. The Morettis backed his play, but they're not accepting the failure quietly. They've declared me responsible for the death of Vincent's brother 3 months ago, a death I had nothing to do with. They're using tonight as justification to move against my operations across the city. What does that mean? His smile was cold enough to freeze. It means war, Sophia, the kind that burns territories and destroys families, the kind that was inevitable, but that I'd hoped to delay. He moved to a panel in the wall I hadn't noticed, pressing his palm against it. A hidden safe opened, revealing weapons, cash, passports. The kind that just got accelerated because I chose to leave the restaurant instead of finishing what Vincent started. Guilt crashed over me like a wave. This is my fault. If I hadn't warned you, if you hadn't warned me, I'd be dead, and the Morettis would still have moved against my operations, only without me there to fight back. He pulled out a handgun, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency that should have terrified me, but instead felt almost reassuring. Your warning bought me time, Sophia. It gave me the chance to fight instead of just die. But your people, your business, will survive because I'm alive to protect them. He turned back to me, and despite the weapon in his hand, despite the cold fury in his eyes, His voice gentled when he spoke to me. "This isn't your fault. This war was coming regardless. You just changed the timing, not the outcome." I wanted to believe him, but the weight of consequences pressed down anyway. People would die because of choices made tonight, because of a warning scribbled on a check, because I'd valued one man's life over the careful balance of power that kept the city from tearing itself apart. Dante must have seen something in my face because he crossed to me in 3 long strides, pulling me against his chest with one arm while keeping the gun pointed safely away with the other. His embrace was fierce, almost desperate, nothing like the controlled touches from before. "Listen to me," he said against my hair. "Whatever happens next, whatever fires I have to put out, you stay here. You stay safe. My men will guard this building with their lives, and no one gets up here without going through them first. Do you understand?" I nodded against his chest, breathing in his scent, trying to memorize the feeling of safety, even as I knew it was an illusion. Safety was relative in his world, temporary at best. "I need to go," he continued, but he didn't release me. "My people need to see me, need to know I'm alive and ready to fight. But I'll come back, Sophia. I promise you that." "Don't make promises you can't keep," I whispered. His hand came up to tangle in my hair, tilting my head back so I had to meet his eyes. "I always keep my promises. Always." Then he did what he'd resisted in the elevator, what I'd been both fearing and craving since the moment our hands touched. He kissed me. It wasn't gentle. There was nothing soft or tentative about the way his mouth claimed mine, nothing careful about how his tongue traced the seam of my lips, demanding entry. It was a kiss born of adrenaline and danger, and the raw acknowledgement that we might not get another chance, that tomorrow was never guaranteed in his world, that this moment might be all we ever had. I kissed him back with equal desperation, my hands fisting in his expensive shirt, pulling him closer even though there was no space left between us. He tasted like whiskey and danger, and promises that might be lies, and I didn't care. For this moment, I let myself forget everything except the heat of his mouth, the strength of his arms, the way he held me like I was something precious even as the world prepared to burn around us. When he finally pulled away, we were both breathing hard, his forehead resting against mine again in that gesture that was becoming familiar, achingly intimate. "Don't die," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. His laugh was low and dark. "Not planning on it. I have too much to live for now." His thumb traced my swollen lower lip. "You've given me something Vincent and the Morettis never anticipated. A reason to fight dirty instead of honorably. They think they're declaring war on a businessman. They're about to discover what happens when you threaten what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, it sent heat pooling low in my stomach, a primal response to being claimed by a man powerful enough to back up his words with action. He released me reluctantly, moving toward the elevator, with the gun now tucked into a shoulder holster I hadn't seen him put on. At the doors, he paused and turned back. "There's food in the kitchen, clothes in the guest room that should fit you. My housekeeper will arrive in the morning to help with whatever you need." He hesitated, and for a moment the mask slipped again, revealing something almost uncertain beneath. "I know this isn't the life you chose, Sophia. I know I've trapped you here, whether I call it protection or imprisonment. But I swear to you, on everything I value, that I will keep you safe, no matter what it costs me." Then he was gone, the elevator doors closing on his dangerous, beautiful face, and I was alone in a penthouse that felt both like a palace and a cage. I moved through the space slowly, taking in details I'd missed before. Family photographs on a shelf, older than I'd expected, showing a young boy with serious eyes standing between an elegant woman and a stern-faced man. Awards and commendations on the wall, legitimate business achievements that sat oddly alongside the reality of who Dante Salvatore really was. A book left open on the coffee table, poetry in Italian, the pages worn from multiple readings. These glimpses of humanity felt dangerous, like they might make me forget what he was, what he'd done, what he was capable of doing. It was easier to think of him as just a crime lord, just another powerful man who took what he wanted and destroyed what got in his way. But the poetry, the photographs, the way he'd kissed me like I mattered, those things complicated the narrative I needed to believe to survive this. I found the guest room where he'd said it would be, discovering a space more luxurious than anywhere I'd ever slept. The bed was enormous, covered in silk sheets that probably cost more than a month of my rent. The attached bathroom had a shower with 6 different heads and a tub deep enough to swim in, and the closet held clothes in exactly my size, designer labels I recognized from magazines I couldn't afford to buy. He'd prepared for me. Before tonight, before I'd even warned him, he'd known I'd end up here. The realization should have angered me, should have confirmed every fear about being trapped, being owned. Instead, it revealed a different truth. Dante Salvatore had been planning to save me whether I'd written that warning or not, had been ready to extract me from my life the moment Vincent's plans threatened to spill over onto innocent casualties. I'd thought my warning had changed everything. But maybe it had simply accelerated something that was already in motion, a collision that had been inevitable from the moment Dante Salvatore had first noticed me serving him drinks, asking nothing for myself, expecting nothing in return. I showered, in water hot enough to hurt, trying to wash away the feel of the restaurant, the memory of Vincent's calculating eyes, the weight of choices I couldn't unmake. But some stains go deeper than skin. Some marks can't be scrubbed away with soap and regret. Wrapped in a robe that was too expensive and too soft, I moved back to the windows, drawn to the view like a moth to flame. The city glittered below, beautiful and lethal, hiding violence behind every light. Somewhere down there, Dante was fighting a war that had started because I'd decided one man's life was worth saving. Somewhere down there, people were dying or preparing to die, all because I'd picked up a pen and written words I couldn't take back. My phone, my old cracked phone from my old life, buzzed in my purse where I'd left it by the door. I retrieved it, my heart clenching, when I saw the messages flooding in. My landlord asking about rent. My coworker, Maria, wondering why I'd left mid-shift. A text from a number I didn't recognize. We know what you did. We know where you live. You can't hide. My hands shook as I read that last one. The threat, casual and absolute. They'd found me, or they thought they had. They were probably at my apartment right now, breaking down a door that would open to reveal nothing but the remnants of a life I'd already abandoned. More messages came through, variations on the same theme. Threats, promises, descriptions of what they'd do when they found me. I should have been terrified, should have been crying or breaking down. Instead, I felt oddly numb, like I was reading about someone else's life, someone else's danger. The elevator chimed, and my heart leaped into my throat. But it wasn't Dante returning. Instead, 2 men in suits stepped out, their expressions professionally neutral as they took up positions on either side of the elevator doors. "Miss Martinez," one of them said, his voice respectful but firm. "Mr. Salvatore asked us to inform you that the building is secure. No one will reach this floor without authorization. You're safe here." Safe. That word again, as if repetition could make it true. "Thank you," I managed, clutching my phone like a lifeline to a shore I could no longer see. They nodded and retreated into the elevator, leaving me alone again, but with the knowledge that I was being watched, protected, guarded, trapped. I returned to the windows, to the city that no longer felt like home, and waited for Dawn or Dante or whatever came next in this new life I hadn't chosen, but could no longer escape. Behind me, the penthouse stretched vast and empty, beautiful and cold, a gilded cage for a bird who'd forgotten how to fly the moment she'd decided that saving one man was worth sacrificing everything she'd ever known. And as the city lights blurred through tears I refused to acknowledge, I wondered if Dante Salvatore was right, if this was protection and not imprisonment, if being alive in a cage was better than being dead and free. I wondered if I'd ever know the difference. Dawn broke over the city in shades of gray and gold, painting the skyline with the promise of a new day I wasn't sure I'd earned. I'd spent the night curled in an armchair by the windows, unable to bring myself to sleep in that too expensive bed, watching the city breathe and bleed beneath me. Every siren made my heart race. Every flash of light could have been gunfire. Every moment Dante didn't return felt like confirmation that promises, no matter how fiercely spoken, were just words against the reality of bullets and blood. The elevator chimed at 6:17, and I was on my feet before the doors fully opened, my heart in my throat. But it wasn't Dante. It was a woman in her 50s, elegant in a navy dress, carrying what looked like shopping bags and moving with the efficient grace of someone who'd navigated this penthouse 1,000 times before. "Miss Martinez," she said, her voice warm despite the early hour. "I'm Elena, Mr. Salvatore's housekeeper. He asked me to come early, to make sure you had everything you needed." Her eyes swept over me, taking in my borrowed robe and bare feet, the evidence of a sleepless night probably written across my face. "Have you eaten?" I shook my head, unable to find words. The normalcy of her question felt surreal against the backdrop of everything that had happened, everything that might still be happening. "Then let me make you breakfast," she said, moving toward the kitchen with the certainty of routine. "Mr. Salvatore called an hour ago. He's alive and well, though he asked me to tell you he'll be delayed. There are complications that require his attention." Complications. Such a careful word for violence, for the war he was fighting because I'd interfered with forces I'd barely understood. I followed Elena into the kitchen, watching as she unpacked the bags with practiced efficiency. Fresh bread, eggs, fruit, ingredients I recognized, but could never afford on a waitress's salary. "You care about him," Elena said, not looking at me as she set a pan on the stove. Not a question, but an observation. "I barely know him," I replied, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Now she did look at me, her expression knowing. "I've worked for Dante Salvatore for 12 years. In that time, I've seen him with many women, beautiful women, powerful women, women who wanted his money or his influence or his name. Not once have I seen him look at any of them the way he looked at you last night when he left this penthouse." My throat tightened. "How did he look at me?" "Like you were the only thing worth coming back to." She cracked eggs into the pan with swift, sure movements. Like losing you would cost him more than losing the war. I didn't know what to say to that, how to process the idea that I'd become something valuable to a man I'd only just met, whose kiss still burned on my lips, whose protection felt like both salvation and imprisonment. Elena fed me scrambled eggs with herbs I couldn't name, toast from bread that tasted like clouds, fruit so fresh it must have been picked that morning. She talked while I ate, filling the silence with stories about Dante that painted a picture of a man more complicated than the crime lord I'd expected. How he'd personally paid for her grandson's surgery when insurance refused. How he'd shut down 3 businesses for exploiting their workers. How he kept his promises, always, no matter the cost. "He's not a good man," Elena said finally, meeting my eyes across the kitchen island. Not in the way the world measures goodness, but he's an honest one in his way. What he promises, he delivers. What he protects, stays protected. What he loves, she paused, weighing her words. What he loves, he would burn the world to keep safe. The weight of that settled over me like a shroud. Love. She'd said love, as if it were possible to fall in love in a single night, as if the connection I felt to Dante Salvatore was anything more than trauma bonding and adrenaline and the desperate gratitude of someone who'd been saved from a death she hadn't fully understood was coming. But I thought about his hands on my face, the way he'd kissed me like I was air and he was drowning, the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd promised to come back. And I wondered if maybe love didn't always need time. Maybe sometimes it struck like lightning, fast and devastating, leaving you changed in an instant. The day passed in a strange limbo. Elena showed me how to use the various controls for the windows, the temperature, the lights. She brought more clothes, these ones clearly selected for me, specifically, in colors I favored, styles I would have chosen if money had been no object. She made lunch, then dinner, her presence a buffer against the isolation and the fear. But as night fell again, as the city lights began to twinkle below like promises that couldn't be kept, my anxiety ratcheted higher. Dante had said he'd come back. But 18 hours had passed since he'd left, 18 hours in which anything could have happened, in which the war he was fighting could have taken him from a world he'd only just allowed me to enter. At 11:30, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "He's coming. 5 minutes." I stood at the windows, watching my reflection ghosted against the city lights, waiting for the sound of the elevator that would signal either reunion or ruin. When it came, I couldn't move. Couldn't turn around as the doors opened, as footsteps crossed the hardwood floor, as his presence filled the space behind me like heat before fire. Sophia. Just my name, but the way he said it, rough with exhaustion and relief and something deeper, made my eyes burn with tears I'd been holding back for 20 hours. I turned slowly, and the sight of him stole my breath. He looked like he'd been through hell and dragged pieces of it back with him. His suit was rumpled, his shirt blood-stained, a cut above his eyebrow that had been cleaned but not stitched. But he was alive, whole, here. "You're hurt," I said, my voice breaking on the words. "Not badly." He crossed to me, and I could see the limp he was trying to hide, the way he favored his left side. The Morettis made their move. We countered. "It's handled." Handled. I reached up without thinking, my fingers ghosting over the cut on his forehead. "You're covered in blood, Dante. That's more than handled." His hand came up to capture mine, pressing my palm against his cheek. His eyes closed briefly, and I saw exhaustion written in every line of his face, felt the tremor running through him that had nothing to do with cold. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "I came back to you." The raw honesty in his voice broke something open inside me. I stepped closer, wrapping my arms around him despite the blood, despite the violence he carried on his skin, despite every reason I should maintain distance. He went rigid for a heartbeat, then his arms came around me, pulling me tight against him with a desperation that spoke of how close he'd come to not returning at all. I was terrified, I whispered against his chest. "Every hour you didn't come back, I thought, I know." His hand tangled in my hair, his lips pressing against my temple. "I know, Piccola. I'm sorry, but it's done now. The Morettis won't threaten us again. Vincent's network has been dismantled. The territories are secure." He pulled back enough to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my heart ache. "You're safe now, truly safe." "And you?" I asked, my hands moving to frame his face, feeling the stubble rough against my palms. "Are you safe?" His smile was tired and sad. "Men like me are never safe, Sophia. We just choose what we're willing to die for." His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "But I have more reason than ever to stay alive now." He kissed me then, soft and careful, nothing like the desperate claiming from before. This kiss tasted of exhaustion and relief, and the beginning of something that terrified me with its intensity. When he pulled away, I could see the pain he was hiding, the cost of the war written in the tightness around his knees. "You need a doctor," I said firmly. "I need a shower and 12 hours of sleep." He tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "The doctor's already been here. Cracked rib, various contusions, nothing that won't heal." "Dante, please, Sophia." His forehead dropped to rest against mine, and I felt the weight of everything he'd carried in the past day, everything he'd done to keep his promise, to keep me safe. "Just let me hold you for a moment. Let me remember why I fought so hard to come back." So I did. I let him hold me in the penthouse above the city, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power that couldn't protect against the fundamental vulnerability of caring for someone in a world built on violence. I felt his heartbeat against my cheek, steady and strong. Proof that promises could be kept even when they shouldn't be possible. Eventually, I coaxed him toward the bathroom, helped him strip away the ruined clothes despite his protests that he could manage. The bruises covering his torso made me gasp. Purple and black, spreading across olive skin, evidence of blows that should have killed him. But he was here, alive, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to function through pain. I ran the shower, adjusting the temperature, then hesitated at the door. "Do you need—" "Stay." His hand caught mine, his eyes holding something vulnerable and raw. "Please, I don't want to be alone right now." So I stayed, sitting on the counter while he showered, watching through the glass as water sluiced away blood and grime and the physical evidence of war. He moved slowly, each motion calculated, and I saw the true cost of his protection, the price he'd paid in flesh and blood to keep his word. When he finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, looking more human and less like an untouchable crime lord, I grabbed the first aid kit Elena had pointed out earlier. For the next hour, I cleaned wounds, applied antiseptic to cuts, wrapped bruised ribs with careful precision. He let me, submitting to my care with a trust that felt sacred. This powerful man allowing himself to be vulnerable in my hands. "Why me?" I asked quietly as I taped the final bandage. "You could have let me go, could have sent me away with money and a new identity. Why keep me here?" His hand came up to tilt my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Because from the moment you wrote that warning, you became mine, Sophia. Not as property, but as someone who saw past the monster everyone else fears and chose to save me anyway." His thumb traced my lower lip. "Because you're brave and honest in a world full of cowards and liars. Because when I look at you, I see possibility instead of just power." "I'm terrified," I admitted, "of this world, of what it means to be yours, of what I've become by choosing to stay." "Good." His smile was gentle. "Fear means you're not stupid. It means you understand the stakes." He pulled me closer until I was standing between his legs, his hands resting on my hips. "But I promise you this, Sophia Martinez. I will spend every day proving that your fear is worth facing, that the life we can build together is worth the danger." "What life?" I asked, my hands resting on his shoulders, feeling the heat of his skin through the thin towel. "I'm a waitress with nothing, and I'm a man who built an empire from nothing," he interrupted, who understands what it means to fight for every scrap of what you have. You're not nothing, Sophia. You're everything I didn't know I was looking for." He kissed me again, deeper this time, his hands moving up my back to tangle in my hair. I kissed him back, with all the fear and longing and desperate hope churning inside me. This man, who'd become my captor and my savior in the space of a single day, who'd fought a war to keep a promise, who looked at me like I was worth more than all the territory and power he'd bled to protect. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "Stay with me," he whispered, "not because you have to, not because you're trapped, but because you want to. Stay and let me show you what we could be together." I thought about my old life, about serving people who never saw me, about the small apartment and smaller dreams, about the safety of obscurity and the loneliness of being invisible. Then I thought about the past 24 hours, about the terror and the danger, but also about being seen, truly seen, by someone who valued what he found. "I'll stay," I said, and felt the rightness of it settle into my bones. "Not because I'm trapped, but because I think I might be falling in love with you, and that terrifies me more than any war." His smile was brilliant and genuine, transforming his face from merely handsome to devastatingly beautiful. "Good," he said again, "because I've been falling for you since you handed me that check with shaking hands and eyes that dared me to do something about it." He stood then, ignoring the pain it caused, and lifted me in his arms, carrying me toward his bedroom with the careful determination of someone who'd decided I was worth every sacrifice. And as he laid me on sheets that smelled like him, as his mouth found mine again with reverence and heat, as his hands mapped my body like territory worth claiming, I let go of the life I'd known and embraced the dangerous, beautiful future stretching before us. The weeks that followed were an education in surviving in Dante's world. Elena became my guide, teaching me the subtle languages of power and respect. I learned which conversations to ignore, which questions never to ask, which parts of Dante's business existed in shadows I couldn't illuminate without risking both our lives. But I also learned the man behind the reputation, the way he checked in with his men's families, ensuring widows were provided for, that children had education funds, the legitimate businesses he ran with the same fierce intelligence he applied to less legal ventures, the code he lived by, brutal but honest, that valued loyalty above all else. I learned that loving Dante Salvatore meant accepting the duality of his nature, the tender way he held me at night versus the cold calculation in his eyes when dealing with threats, the poetry he read aloud in Italian versus the orders he gave that I knew ended in violence I'd never witness, the man who'd promised to protect me versus the monster who'd do anything to keep that promise. 3 months after that first night, I stood at the same windows where I'd waited for him to return from war, but now I watched with different eyes. The city below was no longer foreign territory, but a map I'd learned to navigate, a kingdom where I'd found my place not as a prisoner, but as something more complex. Partner, confidant, the woman who'd saved Dante Salvatore and been saved by him in return. His arms came around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. "What are you thinking about, Piccola?" "About how far I've come from that night in the restaurant," I said honestly. "About the girl who wrote a warning on a check and had no idea it would lead here." "Regrets?" His voice was carefully neutral, but I heard the vulnerability beneath. I turned in his arms, looking up at the man who'd become my entire world. "None," I said, and meant it. "Every choice I've made since that night, every fear I've faced, every piece of my old life I've let go, it led me here to you. I'd make the same choice again, Dante, every single time." His kiss was soft, reverent, filled with the kind of love that survived in the spaces between violence and power, that bloomed in the cracks of broken worlds. When he pulled back, his eyes held promises I knew he'd keep, dangers I'd learned to accept, and a future we'd build together from the ashes of everything we'd been before. "I love you," he said, the words simple but weighted with everything we'd survived to reach this moment. "I love you too," I replied, and felt the truth of it settle over us like benediction. Outside, the city glittered with the same lights that had witnessed my transformation from invisible waitress to visible woman, from victim to survivor, from stranger to beloved. The world Dante inhabited would always carry danger, would always demand prices paid in blood and sacrifice. But standing in his arms, looking at the life we'd built from a desperate warning scrawled on a check, I knew some prices were worth paying. Some salvation came at a cost, but the right person made every sacrifice worth it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.